the next 3 months, really this next quarter, is a very busy quarter for us. We've just filed our CE mark submission, which means that we are now in the pivotal stage of bringing our technology to commercialization and to potentially sales. So for those who don't know what we do, we are a digital healthcare company developing respiratory diagnostic and management tools. The key value proposition for what we do is that we use cough sounds, so the sound of your cough, to measure or diagnose respiratory disease. And the key value that we are able to bring is that we're able to use just the smartphone. So there's no other piece of hardware, there's no medical device as such. We use a smartphone that's already in your pocket to make the diagnosis. We've been running now for roughly 3.5 years, and over that time we've been primarily focused on the clinical side. We've run a number of clinical studies, including 2 double-blind pivotal prospective clinical studies, both here in Australia and the US, and it's the data from those 2 studies that we take to Europe for European approval and the US for FDA approval. Right now, as I said, we've just submitted regulatory filings in Europe. On the back of those, we'll submit regulatory filings in Australia, and we're also in the next 3 months submitting regulatory filings in the US to the US FDA. So very exciting times for us as we transition, as I said, from the clinical side into the commercial side. Respiratory disease, just a very brief overview. Respiratory disease is the most common reason for you to go and visit a doctor. We estimate that there's over 700 million doctor visits every year that results in a diagnosis of respiratory disease. And these diseases can be anything as simple as an upper respiratory tract infection, so a common cold or a sore throat, to something more serious like a pneumonia or an asthma or a bronchiolitis in children or a croup in children. It's really important that you get this diagnosis right because each of those diseases are treated very differently. We know that a number of people are diagnosed with just an upper respiratory tract infection, but are given antibiotics, and that doesn't help an upper respiratory tract infection. So getting this diagnosis right so the treatment can be given correctly is really important. What we're covering with our technology is replacing what is a 100-year-old practice, which is essentially using a stethoscope, which is using chest X-ray to make a diagnosis. It's a very subjective decision. It's based on the clinician's experience and expertise, and essentially a bunch of tests that are used to get to that diagnosis. These tests take time, they cost a lot of money, and in many situations aren't available. So our technology is a fairly easy to use, straightforward app. It sits on a mobile phone that's able to listen to cough sounds and make an accurate diagnosis of those diseases. It was developed here at the University of Queensland, licensed to ResApp about 3 years ago, and since then we've been developing the technology internally. It uses the built-in microphone that you all have in your smartphones, so there's no accessories, nothing to buy to plug into the phone. It's available to anyone who has a smartphone in their pocket. It uses machine learning technology, so that means the more data that we get, the better the algorithms get, and the more things the algorithms can learn. So this is this new wave of machine learning, artificial intelligence, that's really changing how algorithms are developed for things like what we're doing. Very simple to use. Hold the phone about an arm's length away from the patient, cough 4 or 5 times, and provides an instant diagnosis then and there on the phone. As I said, for the last 3 years, we've been focused primarily on the clinic, running clinical trials both here in Australia as well as in the US. 2 major double-blind prospective clinical studies with results of what's called positive percent agreement and negative percent agreement, similar to sensitivity and specificity, in the 80s, if not even in the 90s. So this is the comparison of ResApp's technology with just a cough to a clinician with a complete access to a stethoscope, chest X-rays, blood tests, the whole kit that's available in a modern tertiary hospital. Most of our work to date has been in children, and our first regulatory submissions are in children. We have adult studies underway. We have preliminary results from that look very promising, and we expect results from that adult study also in this first quarter of this year. So we're expecting those to trigger off our submissions in the adult space as well. A unique opportunity really exists for us, in particular in the US, but also now globally in telehealth. What we see now in the US in particular is people using essentially Skype or video conferencing with their clinician. So rather than you going to see your GP at his office, you will sit at home, use your phone, connect to your GP and provide a diagnosis or a treatment over that telephone line, essentially. So in the US, we're seeing tens of millions of consultations happen like this every year. And the reason we're seeing such fast growth is there's a significant cost saving. A telehealth consultation in the US is about $40, $50 per consultation, compared to a GP visit in the US, which costs insurers roughly $300 a consultation. So it's a massive cost savings going to this telehealth model. We're seeing it happen in Europe as well as in Asia. An example here is in China. So Ping An Good Doctor, run by Ping An, one of the largest insurers in China, they do roughly 500,000 telehealth consultations per day in China. And so significant scale available here. The beauty of this for us is that we can provide them with a tool that they don't have today. So in a telehealth consultation, you can't use a stethoscope. The doctor can't listen to your chest over a telephone link or a video link. We provide that doctor with the only way that they can make an accurate diagnosis in that telehealth consultation. And so we fit a really nice niche in that to provide those clinicians with that tool. So that's our first market segment that we're targeting, is telehealth. Our business model here is to essentially partner with those telehealth providers. You won't see a ResApp app as such. Our technology will be embedded in the telehealth company's apps, and we will get paid every time that test is used. So we'll get paid $5 to $10 every time that test is used in those tens of millions of consultations that are happening every year. We're also targeting clinical use, so in an emergency department and an urgent care clinic in particular, where speed is of the essence. So as many of you know, when you get into an emergency department, it often takes a long time. Emergency departments are very heavily incentivized to try to get patients through their emergency department as quickly as possible. If they have to send you off for blood tests, if they have to send you off for x-rays, that causes them problems, that causes them the waiting time that you see in emergency departments. So we have an opportunity to do an instant bedside diagnosis, essentially as soon as you walk into the emergency department or urgent care clinic, or even into your GP's office. And so again, a similar business model, pay per use. We started off this technology diagnosing children with respiratory disease. We've moved into adults, and we're now using this technology to look at diseases such as COPD and asthma, which are diseases that need to be managed day in, day out for the rest of people's lives, but also into things like sleep apnea. And I'll talk a little bit about sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is one of those diseases where you don't really know about it until you've got it. Roughly 3 in 10 men have sleep apnea, roughly 2 in 10 women have sleep apnea. And the key here is that 80% of people who have sleep apnea don't know about it. So there's a significant undiagnosed sleep apnea population essentially out there. That's why ResMed are trying to educate people to try to grow their revenues. And it's seriously linked to heart disease, type 2 diabetes, stroke, all sorts of other health conditions. So it's not just you're a snorer, it actually has significant effect on your health. The problem with sleep apnea is, to be diagnosed, you have to be wired up with 1,000 cables, sleep overnight in a hospital essentially to get diagnosed. Our solution is a smartphone placed on a bedside table, sleep at home, in the comfort of your own home, no cables. We're able to diagnose sleep apnea using just your breathing and snoring sounds from overnight. And we're just as accurate as a full PSG, polysomnography, in a sleep lab. So just in summary, and Scott wanted me to focus primarily on these major milestones. So there's really a number of major milestones happening in the next 3 months, the next 6 months, and over the next year as we transition into a commercial company, essentially. We have some follow-on results from our SmartCough-C, our US study, due in this quarter. We have our FDA de novo submission, which is our FDA submission, happening in this quarter. We have adult study data coming from our Australian adult studies in this quarter. And then later on in this year, we'll have our further sleep apnea results, which will lead to regulatory submissions. And as I said, we submitted our CE mark just at the end of December. And so we're expecting that to come in later this year as well.